The end result of composting is compost, and compost is often called gardener's gold. It's wonderful material that adds organic matter to your garden when you work it into the soil, and as the organic matter breaks down, it provides nutrients for your plants as well.
Making and using compost allows the gardener to recycle garden and yard waste. It also reduces the cost of trash disposal. But not all organic materials belong in the compost pile. The new city ordinance allows such things as leaves, grass clippings, garden fruits and vegetables, and brush. It specifically prohibits items which may cause unpleasant odors or attract insects and animals. The ordinance was sponsored by Alderman Jeff Polinsky following a dispute between neighbors in his district.
A lot of times citizens will not properly manage their compost pile, and it will become a nuisance for their neighbors. It'll attract rodents, or it'll attract flying insects, or it'll smell bad. And when we are dealing with an urban setting with lots, in many cases as wide as only 40 feet, a compost pile can become a problem in a neighborhood.
At the Haven Woods State Forest site on Milwaukee's north side, gardens provide food for the gardeners as well as materials for a compost demonstration site. Composting structures can be made from a variety of materials. They can be simple or complex, but all require the same ingredients.
Ideal size for a compost pile or compost bin is somewhere between 3 feet by 3 feet or 4 feet by 4 feet. That's optimal. You want to be able to add the materials to the top of the pile and then to be able to turn the pile somehow. So you need to be able to get into the pile with a pitchfork or a shovel and turn the materials. And then the compost, which ends up kind of falling to the bottom, can be harvested through the bottom of the container. Turning it is much easier in the very elaborate systems that have cranks and pulleys and chains, and you can turn them just by use of a crank. Compost piles need to be turned to allow air to get into the center of the pile. There's moisture in the middle, and the materials will break down faster if there's more air, and you spread the moisture around. Essentially, composting requires there to be air and moisture, and then both brown materials and green materials. The brown materials being the things that provide the carbon, and those are mostly the dried things like brush and woody plant material, and green material like grass clippings or fresh leaves that provide moisture and provide nutrients, nitrogen in particular, and those nutrients actually feed the organisms that are going to do the breaking down. If the pile is too wet and the pile is not turned often enough so that there's enough air in there, then it can become very wet, very soggy, and rot. Another thing that's often done wrong is by putting meat scraps or animal products into a compost pile. They will eventually compost, but they also are very attractive to all sorts of rodents and vermin, so it's advised to keep those products out. Anything that was an animal product should be kept out of a compost pile.
The city ordinance requires that compost piles be kept in commercial-grade bins, heavy-duty barrels, durable plastics, cinder block, wood or wire mesh, or a combination. Each should have a hood that vents gases without permitting rodents and other pests. It's expected they'll be properly maintained and not too close to anyone's home. There is an exception. Provisions of the ordinance do not apply to compost piles kept by people who have completed a training program. Call the UW Extension at 290-2400 for details.
I think what they learn beyond that, beyond just the basics of composting, is the natural mechanism that occurs with the organisms that actually do the decomposition and breaking down the materials. The amount of moisture and the balance of moisture and aeration are critical, and the more you learn about the materials that go in and the size of those materials, and then how often to turn and how to determine the proper moisture levels, the better your compost pile is going to be.
While the city is hoping residents will follow the new ordinance, there won't be any compost police.
It'll be a complaint-driven ordinance. The department will not be going out to look at compost piles unless a neighbor or an alderman issues a complaint. And I think in the end it's going to be a good ordinance for us in the city of Milwaukee.
Many factors affect the length of time it takes before your compost is ready to go in the garden. But once it is ready, use it. Your garden will thank you. The City of Milwaukee has had a written code of ethics since 1974, one of the first cities in the nation to create such guidelines. We've had a Board of Ethics since 1977.
Milwaukee is known for having a clean government, having a government that's not riddled by underhanded tactics. And the Board of Ethics has, throughout the years, had a much easier job because that tradition has continued.
All elected officials and various board and commission members are covered in some way by the Code of Ethics. In fact, all city employees are covered by some of the code's provisions, which describe standards of conduct and conflicts of interest. The code is based on simple concepts. Don't accept anything of value that could appear to influence or be a reward for public duties. Avoid business associations, financial interests, or other activities which could give rise to conflicts of interest in fact or appearance. The City Code is explained, interpreted, and occasionally enforced by the Board of Ethics. 7 volunteer citizens who must also have no conflict of interest with the city. Board members are appointed by the mayor and common council from 7 specific community groups: the Bar Association, County Labor Council, Association of Commerce, Interfaith Council, Public Policy Forum, the NAACP, and League of Women Voters.
I believe that the intent was to just try and find representative groups of the community that at the same time were not intertwined or involved in the city politics, to try and keep us at arm's length from some of the internal workings so we could be truly objective when we're considering the matters that we consider on behalf of the citizens of Milwaukee.
The Ethics Board has 3 main duties. 1, to provide advisory opinions on whether a specific situation or plan might be a violation of the code.
That's probably the thing we spend our most time on. When a city official or city employee has a question about whether or not something would be okay within the Code of Ethics, they come to us and we offer a confidential advisory opinion. And if they've received a confidential advisory opinion based on accurate information and follow the guidelines of that advisory opinion, it gives them safe harbor in whatever they may want to do.
The second major responsibility of the Ethics Board is to respond to specific sworn complaints about possible violations.
We have an obligation to, as you say, respond or examine complaints sworn by citizens about alleged violations of the Code of Ethics. These are rare, but when we do deal with these complaints, we try to be very fair and very thorough.
The third major role of the Ethics Board is to enforce the requirement for annual financial statements. The Statement of Economic Interest form does not require detailed financial disclosure. It only asks for information on issues that could give rise to possible conflicts of interest. All elected city officials and nominees are required to file, as are city employees identified as having discretionary powers, and members and nominees of designated groups, such as the Plan Commission, Board of Zoning Appeals, and the Historic Preservation Commission.
We collect around 500 statements of economic interest from city employees and officials and members of boards and commissions. And this is the first step in avoiding a conflict of interest. By making a full disclosure of where the potential conflicts would be, it serves 2 purposes. One, it gives the public disclosure of what your interests are so that they can examine it and be sure that there's no conflict. And the second part is, in filling out the statement of economic interest each year, it gives the city officials a chance to examine where there may be a conflict so that in their own mind they can make sure that there's a separation between their position with the city and their personal interest.
Private citizen involvement with the Ethics Board is not as extensive as that of city employees or officials, but everyone who lives in Milwaukee benefits from its activities.
By having a volunteer citizen board that's representative of the citizens, the people can be assured that someone other than just the insiders will know what's going on regarding potential conflicts of interest, and will also give the citizens a place to bring their questions or complaints where they feel that there might be a conflict of interest with a city official or city employee.
Any questions about the board or Code of Ethics can be addressed to 286-8641 or visit the city website at www.ci.mil.wi.us and click on City Departments. Milwaukee has long enjoyed a reputation for good government, for high ethical standards. The Board of Ethics and Chapter 303 of the Milwaukee Code of Ordinances provide the vehicle to help assure the community that its public employees and representatives maintain that reputation. The poster for the Jackson Park neighborhood depicts the lagoon in the largest park on the city's south side. Running alongside the park, the 4-lane highway that is now Forest Home Avenue was once a dirt road to Janesville. A plank road in 1850 brought many new residents to what was then a sprawling agricultural district.
And it was called the Janesville Plank Road and made of, I think, white oak planks. And then in about 1872, it became Forest Home Avenue. And it was named actually after the cemetery, Forest Home Cemetery. And it has been sort of a corridor for settlement in this area.
Doreen has lived here for over 40 years, often writes for the Neighborhood Association's newsletter, and says farmers like Richard Reynolds help draw newcomers.
Well, Richard Reynolds was from Dublin, Ireland, and he had a large tract of land from about 35th Street to maybe 43rd Street. And part of that land the city bought from him, and that, of course, became Jackson Park. Oh, and it was also called Reynolds Grove. It became actually, it was sort of a beer garden. And the Reynolds Farm and the Strothman Farm were two like beer gardens where the people would come out to enjoy themselves.
In 1909, this statue was erected in the park, which is named in honor of President Andrew Jackson. Representing commerce and arts, the statue had been at the entrance of the downtown Chamber of Commerce building at Broadway and Michigan. For nearly 15 years, it was the only improvement in Jackson Park. The Great Depression stopped a lot of home construction, but park improvements continued. Additional land was purchased, it got electricity before many area homes, and one of the largest swimming pools in the county. The Kinnickinnick River was excavated to make the lagoon.
And that was part of a work relief project because, of course, the people at that time, many people were out of work. And so that was finally finished in 1940.
The Jackson Park neighborhood generally runs from 27th to 51st Streets, from train tracks on the north to Morgan Avenue. Some people include the area west to 60th Street, which we featured in an earlier report on the St. Sava and White Manor neighborhoods. A building boom in the 1920s brought many new homes to the area, and by 1927, Milwaukee had annexed most of the land to 50th Street. You'll find a vivid contrast here between the residential styles of homes. Many streets have homes from every period from the 1920s to the 1950s. A subdivision east of Alverno College, Harder's Oak Park, may have the most Lannonstone homes in one area in the city. Curtis Knoll, who's lived here 64 years, remembers cows grazing on what is now Alverno land.
Well, Harder was a developer. He and I believe it was another fellow by the name of Taplin started this subdivision way back in the 30s. It could be the late 20s or early 30s. And prior to that, this was a farm. It was a pig farm, and it belonged to a Mr. Joe Riedinger. I can remember the foundations of the barns on Princeton, on the west side of Princeton. And I can remember the broken dishes and the spoons and forks and knives that we used to find there when we were youngsters that were brought there to feed the pigs. He apparently got all the scraps from the restaurants in the area, and that I can remember that. And when my father was having the house built and he was working out here, he actually found 2 Indian arrowheads on this property that we're on right now.
Following the end of World War II, there was another building boom. At the Manitoba Park site, 50 temporary homes were built to meet the housing shortage for returning veterans. The project's original laundry building now houses the park's restrooms. Some homes around the park were built so fast that many were built without basements. By 1955, the neighborhood was practically full. The ethnic and geographic roots of the new residents are seen in area churches. In 1927, Polish Catholics organized Blessed Sacrament Parish at 40th and Oklahoma and dedicated a new church in 1956. In 1932, German Lutherans built a small frame chapel on 49th Street. It was sold in 1954, and Jackson Park Lutheran Church moved to 46th in Oklahoma. St. Luke Hospital is another area landmark, one of the state's largest. It has a tremendous impact on the area. The new Walmart on 27th Street sits on the site of the city's first shopping mall, which was built in 1950. That paved the way for development of 27th Street as a major commercial corridor. Zablocki Library, named for the longtime congressman who lived nearby, is the most heavily used branch library in the city system. And of course, Leon's Custard Stand, one of the city's most famous landmarks. In 1982, residents formally organized the Jackson Park Neighborhood Association. With membership of 300 families and 50 businesses, it's a very active group.
Well, the park is actually a centerpiece of the neighborhood, and most of the activities, if not all of them, focus right on the park. We have a committee that just deals with the park itself, as far as Park Watch, and every year they have a Sack It To Me Saturday where groups are encouraged to come out and clean up the park, and it's been very successful and a very fun event for local schools, Girl Scout troops. We have a Halloween trick-or-treat at night, which draws over 1,000 children from the neighborhood. And we also have a preschool play group, run walk that we do every year. We have a very strong community association, and other associations look to us and the things that we do as far as events, and they model theirs after ours. And that's a real testament to the people in the community because they spend countless volunteer hours on these programs.
Volunteers like Association Vice President Deb Schrader.
I do the nighttime trick-or-treating, and I also do Christmas caroling, and I do the Easter egg hunt. And for that, we get volunteers from the high school ROTCs, Hamilton ROTC mainly. I also get teenagers from the YMCAs and from the youth groups from the churches, the confirmation kid teenagers that need community service. We do have people from young age up into their 80s and 90s that like to come and help. I mean, they'll walk out flyers during the summertime just around their block just to be involved with the Jackson Park Association.
Jackson Park remains a major recreational resource for the entire community in a neighborhood that is typical in many ways. A diverse mix of involved residents, a variety of home styles and sizes, an assortment of businesses and community centers.
Jackson Park is a very traditional neighborhood as far as the homes go, and it's very deep-rooted as far as block watches and community organizations. People take care of their neighbors. A lot of our meetings surround around issues like safety and crime. People are very involved.
When I meet strangers and they ask where I live, and I describe where I live, and they, oh, such a nice neighborhood, all those different types of homes that they have in there. So
It's a very solid neighborhood. We have great neighbors. In all the years we've lived here, we've never had any problems with our neighbors. And it's a clean neighborhood. As I mentioned, the architecture, various styles of architecture, rather than sort of cookie cutter homes. So we intend to stay here for the rest of our lives if we can, because we really, really enjoy it.